If you're just joining us, welcome to Field Team Six's tentpole event for the year, the Registered Democrats Summit 2024. Our next panel, Why We Will Win, begins now. Super excited about everyone we have here. Since the dawn of time, people have complained that the biggest failure of the Democrats is messaging, and that we often get handed our tuchus on a platter. That's right, tuchus with a ch. That is the correct pronunciation. We get handed our tuchus on a platter by the GOP because they stick to their talking points like an army of robots. I'm happy to say, though, that at Field Team 6, we pride ourselves on using positive, pro-democracy, pro-democrat messaging from visionaries, including the ones on this panel you're about to meet. And we distill them into our social media, our newsletter, our emails, and most importantly, our messages that go out to unregistered likely Democrats in swing states to get them registered. To moderate this panel, I'm super thrilled to introduce Sylvia Salazar, known on Instagram and other social media platforms as tono.latino. Don't forget the dot, tono.latino, since 2018. Everyone, please follow her. She is amazing. In her own words, her posts and videos help Latinos feel less overwhelmed by the news and show her followers how to take action from a place of passion. She makes super complex issues understandable effortlessly, not only in English, also in Espanol. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Field Team 6. It is an honor to be here. I resonated a lot with Robert Hubble this morning when he shared how he started his daily newsletter after what happened in the 2016 election. And my story is actually very similar because I started this adventure now called tono.latino to inform people, primarily Latinos in the US, about what's going on in politics, encouraging them to vote and create change. And I did that because after the 2016 election, I'm an engineer, and so numbers are my passion. I looked at the numbers, and the Latino voter turnout at that time had been below 50% in the previous 6 presidential elections. There's a lot of reasons why that is, but one of them is lack of information. So just like Robert Hubble, I also started a daily newsletter, but in Spanish. And that happened in May of 2017. Then on March 23rd, 2018, almost a year later, like 10 months later, I met with a mentor who lovingly sat me down and said to me, Sylvia, I have no idea what you're saying in your newsletter because I don't speak Spanish, but what I do know is that I don't care how good of a writer you think you are, you probably are, I don't know. You'll never be as passionate as you are in person. And also, Latinos watch way more video than any other demographic group. And so I want to challenge you to start making videos on Instagram. And I looked at him like he was on crack. I was like, no, because I'm pretty introverted. I'm freaking out right now, by the way. But then he said, no. You're going to post a video by 6 p.m. today to your Instagram, or you're going to have to donate $15 to the Orange Devils re-election campaign. I respond very well to punishment threats, and I don't know what my therapist has to say about that. That's a story for a different day. But by 5:55 p.m. that day, I had 2 videos posted to my Instagram. I look like a deer in headlights, but I did it. So that's a little bit of my story of where I'm coming from. And it is an honor to be here today with 3 national messaging luminaries. So let me introduce them to you because I'm super excited, if you can't tell by my energy. Jenifer Fernandez Ancona is co-founder, vice president, and chief strategy officer of Way to Win, the pro team that provides up-to-the-minute message counseling and tested ads for Democrats. She previously served as director of strategic communications at Citizen Engagement Laboratory as a consultant to the Democracy Alliance and as vice president at Women Donors Network. Simon Rosenberg is the Democratic strategist famous for getting the midterms right by calling out the false red wave narrative. And then he cheerfully converted the taunt of Hopium into a really powerful grassroots community on Substack, where he posts daily good news polling interpretations, and engagement opportunities. Now he's a regular on MSNBC and a member of Future Majority. Simon previously founded the New Democrat Network and the New Policy Institute and has helped Democrats win elections from Clinton to Biden. And Courtney Couillard is research manager at HIT Strategies, where she leads the firm's electoral and climate research. Before joining HIT, she worked at Hart Research Associates. She has polled for candidates across the country with a focus on voter mobilization. So hello, everyone. To start, I'd love to hear from each of you your theory of the case for messaging, or like what are your overall views on messaging in 4 to 5 minutes each, and I'll do mine at the end, and then we can discuss them and, solve all the world's messaging problems. Jen, why don't we go with you first?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And hi, everyone. Great to be with you. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Our process is where I begin, like how we see the theory of the case, because this is really important. Like how we find messages that unite and win are through this process that we call listening plus art plus science. So we're deeply listening to voters. We're creating content that we think can move them in a bunch of different ways, and then evaluating that to see how are we moving voters. And our goal is what we call mobilization. So we're trying to both persuade and mobilize this big, diverse coalition that we know we need. And we're looking for messages that are in that sweet spot in the middle because we can repeat them over and over again. We did this in the lead up to the midterms with the Protect Our Freedoms messaging that everyone saw made such a huge difference to be able to tie abortion issues and democracy issues together in one frame and kind of make the election about freedoms. And this mattered. We saw it in the results. We also saw it in our own polling that the two issues of Dobbs and democracy actually overtook people's concerns about economic issues and inflation. Now, we know that in an election year, a presidential year, economic issues are going to have a bigger salience. They always do. And so this year we were looking for, we did a bunch of research and study to find how can we take this freedom frame, but also bring it into more of an economic context. So this idea of our freedoms, our families, our futures are on the line is what the data has been telling us in this last cycle. We tested a bunch of different messages, did a bunch of different studies in this last year. And one of the things that we found was that it can be really powerful to add economics into the freedoms messaging. You can see here with this quote we made for Biden to say actually tested really well with everyone around moving toward Biden and Democrats. And you can see in the message how we bring the freedom frame in. We then also found this frame of a better life can be really powerful. So we know what Democrats are for. They're trying to have everyone have a better life. That's everything from having enough money to put food on the table to having our kids grow up happy and safe, having our communities be safe places to live. So this frame of a better life is a positive frame that can plug a lot of different issues into it. And we found it powerful with both swing and surge voters. Because the other thing that we believe is that, we don't live as single issue lives, as Audre Lorde famously said, but we also don't face single issue attacks. So we may want to make this election all about abortion, or we may want to make it all about economy, but the Republicans are going to make it about whatever they want to make it about. And they will throw attacks at us on things like crime and immigration and other sort of status threat attacks that we've seen. And so we need a frame like a better life that can pivot and respond when these attacks come. So I want to show one example around the issue of immigration to show that we can make a positive case for what Democrats want that doesn't actually involve putting ourselves on the Republican turf, which too often we do see with mainstream Democrats. So I'll show you this example.
Most of us will do whatever it takes to make a better life. We work and even pack up everything so we can provide for our families. Immigrant Americans move for the promise of freedom and opportunity. Democrats offer real solutions, create a fair immigration process, and make the border work. Republicans block them, using chaos and conflict as a distraction while taking away what families need. Let's trade Republican hate peddling for Democrat problem solving.
So the final point that I'll make is that we are in a unique moment, as well as everyone knows, where we have a lot of challenges in inspiring a base to be really active. We need everybody out there. We need all the votes we can get. And there's some storylines that we're seeing in the data that can help it, inspire and mobilize and motivate people. The first that I'll share is framing the contrast. So this election isn't just about two candidates at the presidential level. It's about two very different futures. People need to understand what the different future will be under Trump. It's not just who he is, it's what he will do. When people understand that, they become very motivated and mobilized. The second is voters need agency. So the idea is like, we've done this before, we can do it again. The mantra is we did, we can, we will. And that can, we found in our studies, can actually get people out of kind of a malaise that they're in to get excited about this election. And the final point is that we have to not be about anger or fear, but it's actually defiance is the emotion that we need to cultivate right now. This idea that like, no, you are not going to take these freedoms away. We are not going to go back to that place we were, and we need to go forward to a different future. So we're going to be doing a lot of content this cycle. We're going to be doing briefings and regular newsletters through this program called Amplify. We invite everybody to be a part of it. I can put the sign up link in the chat as well. But if you sign up here, you'll get on the newsletters, you'll get invited to the briefings. We're trying to make content on all platforms available to activists for sharing. And so look forward to seeing you all as the cycle goes on.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was beautifully done, even with the technical difficulties, and the ad with the Latinos really connected with me, by the way. And now I would love to hear from Simon.
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow. Amazing work from Jen and her team. And also, Sylvia, great to see you, and Courtney and Dale and Jason. I'll just make 2 points. I've been struggling a little bit to try to figure out how to exactly follow Jen because it was so comprehensive and smart. And I should note that in 2004, my organization, my old organization, NDN, launched the first national Spanish language media campaign that was ever done by a democratic organization. And our tagline, and I don't speak Spanish, so I'm going to get it wrong, but was, with Democrats, you get a better life. And it was all around better life in the entire frame of the 8-month-long campaign that we did. And so that tested well 20 years ago, Jen. And I'm glad to see that it's still testing well now. So 2 points I have about try to be complimentary of what Jen just went through. One is, I do think there's this other piece of messaging that happens in campaigns with candidates and also with us when we're talking to people in our networks and in our communities, which is that I think that I talk about this a lot at Hopium, is that, people always say, can I have my talking points? What should I say when I talk to people? And my answer is, you have to talk about what you know and what's passionate to you, because the passion and the integrity of your narrative and story that you tell really matters, right? The people believing you know what you're talking about and also connecting to the passion that you have. And so when I talk in our Hopium community about, what's the best way to work people in your networks and your communities, I talk about maybe focusing on 1 or 2 issues that really matters to you and talk about why those issues matter to you so much. Because in a political context, when you have candidates and campaigns, you have all this abstract messaging in a campaign. But in real politics, right, in real elections, all of these messages are then funneled through an actual candidate and a life experience and a narrative and a story and a biography. And that's what animates all of this stuff to take it from the abstract discussion we're having and making it far more real in people's lives. And so part of what I would just recommend to everybody is, don't be scared about putting yourself at the center of everything that you do when you communicate. Play off of the things that matter to you. Explain that I'm supporting Joe Biden because of reproductive freedom or because of climate change. And don't feel like you have to do everything, right? You don't have to know everything. You have to know what matters to you and what's motivating you. And I think that kind of work hand to hand in small communities can be very persuasive, because really at the end of the day, I've always believed that politics is about people and passion. And the second thing I'll just raise is about staying positive. This is an area of enormous, and I really appreciate the way Jen just in her presentation talked about this. you want to be attractive, right? You want people to come towards you. You want to build a coalition where you're growing and not shrinking. And I think that sometimes, we need to be better as Democrats at understanding that the glass is coming from a place where the glass is half full and not half empty. It's the goal of advocacy organizations to often say, hey, good things have happened, but there's all this more to do. We haven't finished the job. In politics, we have a slightly different job, which is we have to be able to say, particularly as an incumbent party, that we've made all this progress, and yes, there's more to do, but we can't jump and leave the progress part. We can't go to the part that isn't done yet. It's a different job in politics. We have to stay more in the place of these are the things that and when you're running for re-election, if you can't cross this threshold place where I've taken this power you've given me and I've made things better, then there is no reason to get to the rest of the discussion. And so I think that two things about staying positive. One is glass half full, not half empty. And also a recognition that MAGA's central strategy, one of its central strategies, is to pour negative sentiment into our discourse every day. They want us to feel bad about our country, our democracy, our leaders, our institutions, each other. And we have to become more conscious of countering that negative sentiment with positive sentiment. They're trying to talk down the country. We should talk it up. And I often talk about how one of our collective jobs is that we have to give Americans permission to love their country again. This is, I think, really central to everything that we do. We have to counter their nationalism with patriotism. And so getting to a place where we're really coming at this project together, right, through a sense of love of country, a sense of patriotism, a sense of that we are going to talk about the greatness and the goodness of the country itself and the American people, is a very, very powerful place for us, and one that we have to work on more. And then finally, when I say 2/3 positive, 1/3 contrast or negative, we all need to be spending more time in the positive places, making our case for what we've done, and a little bit less time, I think, in the contrast. I think if those are my 3 thoughts for everybody today. Happy to turn it back to Sylvia.
Thank you, Simon. I have learned so much from you in the last few years, and I really appreciate you being here on this panel. And I hope a lot of people will sign up for the Hopium newsletter, because Simon is trying to reach an important goal. And now I want to hand it off to Courtney.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylvia and Jen and Simon. I'm really thrilled to be here and be able to share a little bit of insight. I have a cold, so please excuse me if I cough. But I'd love to share some insight and some research that we have been doing at my firm, Hit Strategies. For those who might not be familiar with us, we are a full-service public opinion firm founded just a few years ago with a real mission on better representing and understanding what we call the emerging electorate. And that is an electorate that is incredibly diverse, and it is also a young electorate that is going to and has already begun to decide elections based on their votes. And so our mission is really to better understand how do we message to those folks. I will say that we have found that it has become pretty clear with our message testing that the best type of message that works with the emerging electorate, but also the wider electorate, is one that is rooted in values. So when I'm talking about values-based messaging, there's a difference between saying Democrats want to raise the minimum wage versus saying we all deserve a fair wage that allows us to live freely and raise a family. That is why Democrats want to invest in raise the minimum wage. And so it's really important when we're thinking about messaging this year and in future cycles is that we lead with a shared value. And part of why that is so important is because we have been in focus groups of voters over the past couple of years, and they continue telling us that they do not feel connected to the people running for office. They don't like their choices when they're going to the ballot and voting. And that's especially clear this year when we're thinking about the top of the ticket. And so we have to figure out ways that we can connect with these folks. And a part of that is by centering the values and also the priorities that they care deeply about. And so in thinking about the emerging electorate, campaigns are definitely going to need to make it a priority to connect with those folks, talking about issues that they care about, including climate change, student loan forgiveness, cost of living. All of that are really high concerns for this electorate, and they're going to want to hear from campaigns on those topics. Another part of why this is important is because we have been measuring something called vote power at Hit Strategies. When we conduct polling, we're often asking folks, how motivated are you to vote in an election? How likely are you to vote in an election? And we have created a new metric, and that is how much power do you feel that your vote has to create change in your community? What we have found, especially in our research with the Black electorate, is that there is a direct correlation between perceived individual vote power and their actual motivation to vote. And so in applying that to this cycle, what we really think is going to be valuable is creating messages that instills voters as heroes of progress, allowing them to really own a lot of the historic legislation that has been passed over the past several years, and allowing them to know that if they go out to vote, they are making a choice for a better future and denying a future under, Republican leadership. I want to just share one slide on that metric about vote power before I turn it back to Sylvia. So just bear with me for 1 second. So here's some data behind that sense of vote power. So we asked this question. This is among Black registered voters in Georgia back in 2020. We asked, regardless of how often you vote, how much power do you think your vote has to make a difference in your community? We measured that starting back in 2020, that overall across the Black electorate in Georgia, 73% of voters said that their vote had power or that it was extremely powerful. And we've only seen that kind of fluctuate too throughout the cycles. As we got into the midterm elections in 2022, that perceived vote power dripped a little bit. What's also really important here, though, is that we also see differences in that perceived vote power within the Black electorate by both gender and age. We see that Black men especially have lower perceived vote power than Black women. And even more clearly, we see that for younger Black voters, particularly Black younger men, they have even lower vote power. So thinking about our missions ahead of us this cycle, it's going to be really important that we use messaging that centers them as heroes, really instills that sense of vote power. And I think Jenifer's point was really key, that it leans into both mobilization, but also persuasion as well.
Courtney, thank you so much for that powerful perspective. I'm going to end with some thoughts on how I choose to do my content. As Jason introduced me, I try to help people feel less overwhelmed by the news. So I try to create a balance in my audience's news consumption, carefully vetting my sources and creating boundaries to protect my mental and emotional health, as well as my audiences, because I hear a lot of them freaking out constantly, and then I try to calm them down. And I give them personal examples of how I set very specific rules on how I consume news or learn about what's going on. Because I noticed years ago, for example, that constantly reading headlines and getting push notifications on my phone had my blood pressure like up here, and I was rattled and angry and fearful all the time. And I also realized that if I watch news at night, I have nightmares of Mitch McConnell and former Congressman Madison Cawthorn. This is me not making it up. Like literally, I've had nightmares of these men. So I do not watch news at night. I record and watch them in the morning. And so as the editor-in-chief of my platform, Tono.latino, I try to be very careful about what I share or amplify. And especially after learning a bit more from Anat Shenker-Osorio, teaching us not to amplify the MAGA rhetoric, which is very much in line with what Simon said earlier, because it doesn't work. And I also try to remember that most people who follow me do not follow politics 24/7, like many of us in here. And again, I hear from so many of them that they're overwhelmed, they feel defeated, and they're just like, I just want to tune it all out. But they choose to give me maybe a minute or two of their time, of their attention span. So I have to be very careful of how I use that attention from them. And as I mentioned in my intro, Latinos watch more video than any other demographic group. To give you a specific example, Spanish-speaking households watch 12% more YouTube than English-dominant homes. And then there's other statistics for the other platforms. So I try to keep that in mind, and that's why I've been creating content both in English and in Spanish, which is honestly exhausting, if I'm being frank. But as Spanish speakers know, and it's a topic that I have discussed with Simon, and I love how he helped me realize I wasn't crazy with this because it was more of a gut feeling. It is important to make that content in Spanish authentically and not relying on voiceovers or captions, because it makes a huge difference, especially when it's a Latina person talking to the Latino community. And I've also started combining information from Simon's newsletter, Robert's newsletter, Heather Cox Richardson, Dan Pfeiffer, popular information. And then I put a little bit of my like Latin flavor in it, and I make it into a video to inform my audience. And then I get the comments from a lot of people saying like, thank you. Like, it's not as bad as like the headlines. And I'm like, stop watching cable. Stop letting the New York Times send you notifications. Just like stop it all. And I usually send them links to these newsletters to sign up. So what I'm saying here is a lot of what our panelists have shared, except it's more like Sylvia's gut feeling, and they have literal charts to show you the importance of amplifying the good things and being careful about how we share information. So those are my views on messaging. But now we're going to open it up for a conversation, and you all can feel free to jump in or confirm or contradict each other. My first question is for Simon. So you believe we should strive to get to 55 this cycle, and all the grassroots folks on the Zoom love that goal. Do you see indicators that national and state party officials are setting their sights on this higher than usual goal?
I think that what is true universally is this sense of the gravity of the moment. And as Jen showed, right, that there is a great awareness of this in our coalition. And obviously with everyone running the elections. I think that we're still very early. I mean, we're 8 months out. I try to describe this as it's like a basketball game where the first quarter has ended and we're down 2 points. I mean, it doesn't matter. It has no predictive capacity whatsoever about what's about to happen. I mean, 90% of the election is still ahead of us. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do. And we shouldn't be in any way getting blown around by the current polling data. Although by one of the major polling averages today, Biden actually went into positive territory. So that may all be moot within a few days anyway. I think that we've had ambition. The party has had remarkable ambition in the last few years. I mean, we've been able to outperform expectations now in 2022 and 2023 and 2024. And let me just say that for everyone here, you know, obviously in 2018 and 2020, we had a terrific 2 elections, right? We won the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and we're able to forge up an anti-MAGA majority in the country. But what's happened in these since Dobbs in the spring of 2022, may be even more impressive and more important in what we've been able to do together, because we were supposed to, by history, lose power and lose seats and lose the midterms and lose off-year elections and lose special elections. And the exact opposite has happened. When you talk about power and this perception of power, you know, Courtney, as you were getting into, we have extraordinary power in the Democratic Party right now. We're building the biggest grassroots machine that we've ever had in all of our political history. And we keep performing because of this grassroots machine. We keep performing at the upper end of what's possible in election after election in 2022 and 2023 and now in early 2024. And so I do think there is a growing understanding that this machine that we're building, the passion of 2 to 3 million people who are not going to let their democracy slip away on their watch, who are writing the postcards and making the phone calls and, you know, being information warriors and all the things that we do. There's a growing understanding in the Washington community about how powerful this thing really is. And the 2 million phone calls in the Swazi race in New York 3 blew everybody's mind. And I think that was a game changer for the Washington crowd to understand that what's underneath us here, the structural power of the party that we're building together, is unprecedented. And that it's irregardless of the candidate, frankly. It's every race. It's like deadheads, right? Just moving from, you know, concert to concert to concert. We keep showing up in these races and we keep winning. And I just want to make sure that I say why I'm here is just how proud I am of everyone who's been part of this. We are kicking ass and taking names. We're doing extraordinary things. We're defying history. And I'm proud to also be here with Field Team 6, who are working so hard to expand our coalition and to grow our vote and to make sure that we just don't win this election, but we win by a lot. And I always worried, and I'm not a worrier, I always say do more, worry less. But the one thing that I am worried about is that we were going to lack the ambition this cycle to be able to take advantage of the historic opportunity I had by their radicalization. I'm not worried about that anymore. I think we've been showing again and again and again that when we show up, we do extraordinary things, and we're going to continue to do that over the next 8 months.
Thank you, Simon. Courtney, we know that hit strategies, as you showed us with your slide, has a finger on the pulse of Black male voters today. You offer us fresher approaches to what they're needing to help overcome their understandable pessimism. Would you tell us, please, what is going to work moving forward and what past techniques we should let go?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's something we've been digging into greatly, especially with this past midterm cycle, where we very clearly measured a gender gap in the Black electorate. Black women, for the most part, are very reliable Democratic voters. They have that high sense of motivation and vote power. But we are beginning to see our Black men, especially younger Black men, slipping towards the center a little bit. And they're really weighing their options in elections. They're not just turning out for Democrats because they are a part of the Black electorate. And I think that's a really important piece for us to understand, is that the Black electorate is a very complex electorate. It is not a monolith in any way. Part of what is different here are these perceptions of progress. So what we hear often qualitatively when we're speaking with Black male voters is that they feel like their lives were better when Donald Trump was president than it is today, or it's about the same. So they really are not feeling at this point in March of 2024 that there has been great progress made that has changed their individual lives under a Democratic president compared to President Trump. And that's really scary data to be hearing and seeing, but it's also very motivational for us to be able to better understand. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do is really lean into progress and proof points. What we also continue to measure is that voters are, they lack awareness of the historic progress and legislation that has been passed over the past 4 years. And so it is not a problem of Democrats not getting the job done. We are not effectively communicating the job and the work that we have been doing. And I think that's where we win this year too. When we are able to connect, especially with this electorate of Black male voters, to give them proof behind progress, but also especially progress behind issues that they care deeply about. So things like reducing costs of living, investing in Black-owned businesses, investing in HBCUs, all of these things that have been accomplished that is very personal to their community and their lives, they need to hear about that. And I think that's where we can really succeed in messaging with that group this cycle, and turn them back into the Democratic fold with effective messaging there.
Thank you, Courtney. That is the perfect way to move to a question to Jenifer, because I want to ask her about Jenifer's amazing midterm cycle messaging research, and I want her to give us some tips. What are the frames or phrases that gave the biggest statistical lift, changing the attitudes and even the actions of the recipients? That's going to be the last question before we wrap up, because there's a ton more things happening in today's event.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Sylvia. And yeah, all of these things are also relevant for this moment. So it's great to bring it back up because the midterm message did really work well. And it is very, we need to keep it going. It also worked throughout all of 2023 in Wisconsin and Virginia and all the wins that Simon mentioned as well. So one of the biggest things was making election a contrast. So we don't want this election to be a referendum on Biden. We want it to be a contrast between the Trump MAGA Republicans who want to take us backwards and the voters who can come together and protect our freedoms and our futures. Like Courtney said, it's about giving the voter agency that they have power. So that idea is really important. The other idea that was really important was this idea about activating loss aversion. So people do not like things that they have to be taken away from them, things that they like, freedoms, rights, all of those things. It is one of the most powerful, persuasive tools that we have. When people think something they like is going to be taken away, they are very motivated to protect that. So we can use the freedom frame, we can use the better life frame to talk about where we're going and what Republicans are going to possibly take away. The other one that was really helpful and important, which I mentioned in my overview too, is we need to go on offense on every issue. We can't leave anything on the table. Courtney said this too. We don't have to leave anything on the table, because the reality is Republican ideas are very unpopular. In fact, that is why they have put so much money and effort into marketing. They're bad ideas, but our ideas and our vision on almost every issue is widely popular with voters. We just need to lean into saying what we're for. Patty put the framework in the chat, the 3 V's, leading with our values, calling out the villain, and talking about our vision. So that idea of going on offense on everything, whether it's trans rights, immigration, crime and safety, we have a message on all of that, and we should not be afraid to call it out. And then the final thing is like this idea that the cynicism is very high right now. There's a high amount of cynicism. I know, Courtney, you've seen it in your data as well. But we can combat that with this kind of positive idea of collective action, and this idea that we've come together before, we can do it again, and reminding people of their power. And I loved what Simon said, and it's like, that is the moment we are in. Despite everything feeling very doom and gloom kind of at all times, no matter where you look, the reality is we have the ability to rebuild the Democratic trifecta at the federal level, the presidency, with 50 senators who actually will amend the rules reform to pass voting rights reform, to codify Roe and give abortion rights to everyone. And we can flip the House. I mean, it's within our grasp. We should not forget that we have the power to do that huge thing. It's a big opportunity. So whenever you feel the challenge, I would just remind everyone to remember that opportunity that we have to make real change and push progress forward this cycle.
Thank you, Jen. I could talk to the 3 of you the rest of the day. There are some questions that we actually didn't get to, but we're running out of time. So unfortunately, this is it. Massive thank you to our wonderful panelists, Courtney Couillard, Jen Ancona, and Simon Rosenberg. And thank you all for attending this panel. And now I hand it back to Jason.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you so much, Jen and Simon and Courtney. Seriously, just in awe of your brains. Jen inspired defiance. We are not going back. Beautiful. Simon, counter their nationalism with our patriotism. Passion and authenticity gives messaging power. Courtney, make the voter the hero and they will vote. Oh, Sylvia, talking about how video is a crucial tool that meets people where they are. And when you speak people's language, figuratively and literally, it works. So I have been persuaded, mobilized, and yes, mobissuaded that you are all geniuses. And just echoing what Simon was saying, yes, just by being here, everyone on this call at this Registered Democrat Summit, you have joined what will be, by November, the greatest organizing force ever assembled in this country. We are going to win this.